we cut right across to Moscow, where the Russian President Vladimir Putin is speaking. He is essentially going to be talking about Russia's war in Ukraine. This is a State of the Nation address that's taking place in Moscow as of now. Remember, it will be 1 year since the war began, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began. It will be 1 year soon on February 24th. We are days away from that date, and the world is closely watching the State of the Nation address, which is currently happening in Moscow. This is perhaps one of the most highly watched addresses in recent times. The Russian President Vladimir Putin is speaking. It is important to note that foreign media and the world largely is focusing on the fact that he's speaking at a time when the war in Ukraine is about to complete 1 year. It will be 1 year since Russia mounted its offensive in Ukraine. And the speech carries special significance because it is happening right after the US President Joe Biden made a surprise visit to Ukraine in a clear show of support to Ukraine. And in fact, the US President Joe Biden is also expected to hold a press conference later in the day. But all eyes right now are on Moscow, on what Russia's President Vladimir Putin is saying. Some of the details coming in right now include that members of the Federal Assembly and those are currently in attendance. Russia's top brass is currently in attendance in Moscow as the Russian president is holding a press conference. Some more information coming in. Members of the foreign media, it seems, are not invited this year to this State of Nation address. Remember, the speech was postponed back in December, and it's coming ahead of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's a lot of conversation about how this speech is highly symbolic. It is a symbolic clash, in fact, between Russia's President Vladimir Putin and US President Joe Biden. Biden is expected to hold stage later in the day. We, of course, will be tracking that speech as well. For all our viewers who are tuning into WION World is One right now, stay tuned. This is Russian President Vladimir Putin addressing the top brass in Russia. And of course, Russian media in Moscow right now. This is a State of Nation address. It happens days before. It will be 1 year since Russia mounted its offensive in Ukraine. Russia's top brass is currently in attendance, and all eyes are on what Putin will be saying. Analysis, we have our guest of the hour. Joining us now is Fred Weir, live from Moscow. Weir happens to be a journalist and also a political commentator. Fred, we've spoken about the war over the last year. We've seen different allies come to light. Now, this State of the Nation address carries special significance. It is days before. It'll be 1 year that the war in Ukraine began. President Biden is expected to speak later in the day. What's your analysis of what's going on at the moment in Moscow?
Well, this is, of course, first address of this sort he's given in almost 2 years. So it's been an awfully turbulent time, and Russian society has changed. I think that we're being told that he's going to concentrate on what's called the special military operation and how it's going. But I think more than that, Russians need to get some answers to questions. The first question everyone I know has is when and how will this end? Putin, I hope, will give some indication of how that will be. But also, how is it going? Last year saw some disasters.
Right.
I mean, not catastrophes. Russia pulled back. It reformed its lines. Ukrainians celebrated their victories, but they didn't actually defeat the Russian army.
Right, Fred, if I may come in just there, we are also getting some more statements that are coming from Vladimir Putin. We, of course, know that he is going to be talking about the stance of Russia when it comes to the narrative that he's building between the support that West has offered to Kyiv. He says that US, NATO were deploying troops, secret biolabs near our borders. He also goes on to say that US and its allies were preparing for a big war, and now they are admitting it openly. How do you view these statements?
Well, this is his main pitch to Russians about why they have to stay the course in this war. That is, we're not just fighting little Ukraine, we're fighting the United West. And the West does do a lot of things and say a lot of things to give fuel to Putin's contention that they're all behind Ukraine and they're really combatants in this war. So, but this is the main thing that Russians that I know do believe, is that it's not just about Russia and Ukraine, it's about Russia and the West. Right. So this is what he's saying, and Joe Biden did a lot, as European leaders do and say a lot, to kind of support that Kremlin contention.
Right. Bringing some more statements coming from Vladimir Putin himself. You mentioned Joe Biden and the U.S., of course. The U.S. President Joe Biden is slated to speak later in the day. That, of course, will be a watched-out address as well. Now, Putin clearly says that we were open to dialogue with the West. We did everything to resolve the issue peacefully. In response, we got hypocritical words, expansion of NATO to our borders. He's clearly going after the U.S. in this scenario.
Well, yes, and they do see the United States as their main, their main enemy here, the main instigator of all this, as the Russians see it, and they will. A lot of that discussion that Putin wants to have about how Russia was reasonable and wanted peace is not a discussion that anyone else, even Russians, are going to want to have now, because a year ago, Putin made the decision to turn it into a hot war. And that's what we've got now. Dealing with that and getting out of that is what will be on everybody's minds.
Right. He's also saying that the world is witness to how the U.S. withdrew from weapon agreements. Will we see the U.S. President Joe Biden tackling all these statements made by Vladimir Putin? He is going to be speaking hours from now.
I'm doubtful that Biden will respond to Putin in a debate-style rebuttal. I don't think we're going to see that happening. I think Biden is going to reinforce. He's in Poland, and he'll be reinforcing what he said in Kyiv yesterday. That is, the United States and its allies are behind Ukraine in this war as long as it takes.
Right. Now, he also says that each of us is bound by a huge responsibility. I think the big question when the speech was announced was, where is the war headed? On February 24th, it will be 1 year since the offensive began. We've seen Biden make a surprise visit to Ukraine recently. It's a clear show of support to Ukraine in this war. So how do you see the situation progressing from here on?
I think that we're going to see a shift in the battle lines. Russia made some strategic blunders early on. They thought they could take Kyiv in a few days. That failed miserably. They thought that with less than 200,000 soldiers, they could hold those lines that they had in the first months in eastern Ukraine. The Ukrainians proved that wrong, but the Russians withdrew from Kharkiv and Kherson. As I said, in more or less in good order. The Russian armies were not destroyed, though they were partially defeated. Now, Russia has undergone a mobilization. They've got, I don't know how many, but the estimates run from 300,000 to 500,000 fresh troops there headed for the front lines. They must have a plan for a new offensive, well, either soon, as long as the ground is hard. Now it's frozen down there. Or wait for spring, that is April, May. But certainly the Russians are going to launch an offensive. And they say that the Ukrainians are running out of ammunition, they're running out of manpower. They've been trapped in those grinding battles of attrition like in Bakhmut. And the Ukrainians don't have the ability to launch an offensive of their own.
WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.